Welcome, everybody, to Behind the Deep State. I'm your host, Alex Newman, senior editor at the New American Magazine. Folks, we talk a lot here on this program about sustainable development, as the UN likes to refer to it, and we talk a lot on this program about education. They intersect in multiple ways and multiple places, but today we have a very special guest joining us who has filled in some pieces of the puzzle that were missing. This information is so huge and so explosive, so hang on to your seats. Agenda 21, obviously, it was described by the UN as the agenda for the 21st century. Nice little handy summary of it said it was going to be intended to be implemented by every person on Earth, and that effective execution was going to require a profound reorientation of all human society, unlike anything the world has ever experienced. And they're not kidding. I actually have the Agenda 21 for Children book right here, and it's insane. It's got a nice little thing from Al Gore saying we need a global surveillance system operated by children to make the planet sustainable. It's got weird population control nonsense. I mean, you almost can't believe this thing. It's an atrocity, but it's called Rescue Mission Planet Earth, the children's edition of Agenda 21, and it's published by UNESCO. So before we get to our guest, who has some explosive information, a little bit of background for those of you who aren't regular viewers, you're not familiar maybe with Agenda 21. We had our correspondent, William F. Jasper, at this summit back in 1992 when Agenda 21 was approved by the governments of the world. Here's George H.W., Mr. New World Order Bush, talking about how great Agenda 21 was going to be.
We've signed a climate convention on the importance of economic instruments and free markets. Were included in this mammoth Agenda 21 document and the Rio Declaration.
Aha! So contrary to what you may have heard from the Soviet Poverty Law Center, Agenda 21 is not a crazy conspiracy theory. It's actually an international agreement signed by all the governments in the world. And by the way, as far as the United States was concerned, this was fully bipartisan. Here is the leader of the Communist Party in Congress for a long time, Democrat Party, Nancy Pelosi, talking about how great this was all going to be and how all of our national policy needed to be oriented around this Agenda 21.
The Earth Summit Environmental Leadership Act, as this is known, presents us with an opportunity to follow up on the important work of the Earth Summit to develop its blueprint, Agenda 21, for global environmental action. HCON Res 353 outlines a comprehensive national strategy for sustainable development in accordance with the principles of Agenda 21 to be coordinated under the leadership of a specific office and at the direction of a high-level government official. The resolution also urges the United States to identify and initiate further agreements to protect the global environment.
Okay. Now, if you read Agenda 21, it's huge, hundreds of pages. But in Chapter 36, you'll find what I think is the essence of this program, and what our guest is going to show actually was the genesis of this program. So in Chapter 36, it says education is critical for promoting sustainable development, which is this ideology. Formal and non-formal education, it says, are indispensable to changing people's attitudes. And then it says that this education should include spiritual development, and that it should be integrated into all disciplines. This is right from the text of this agreement. Joining us now to discuss is a returning guest. She is a great American. She's the host of the channel Parents of Patriots. She's the author of the phenomenal Substack Education Manifesto. She's online on X at I am Lisa Logan. And her name, of course, is Lisa Logan. She's got an extraordinary article posted on InfoWars just this month called The Actual Origins of Agenda 21, Why It's Not a Conspiracy Theory, and How It Systematically Changed Education in America. Lisa, welcome to the program. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, a pleasure to be here, Alex.
It's great to have you. You've done some really important work researching the behind-the-scenes stuff, not just on this, on so many other topics. I'm always amazed at the information you dig up. Very few people in the world are doing what you're doing, and so I'm grateful, Lisa, for your efforts. I learned a lot reading this article, and you know, I've spent many years of my life studying this, so I don't often say that I've learned a lot on these topics, but your article was really, really informative. And one of the things that really jumped out to me, Lisa, and I want you to pick it up here, is that this was all actually planned before we heard about Agenda 21 in Rio, and it all involved injecting pantheism into the education systems of the world. So with that as a backdrop, explain to us what happened here with Agenda 21.
Well, I was always kind of confused about that too, Alex. Generally, the United Nations, they have kind of round numbers, Agenda 2030, or their 15-year Millennium Development Goals from 2000 to 2015, and then their new Sustainable Development Goals from 2015 to 2030. So I was like, why a 21, right? And maybe it was 21st century. So I almost fell out of my bed when I was reading this book, which was literally the conference proceedings of the Seeking the True Meaning of Peace conference that happened in June in 1989. When I read that, there was a meeting in Costa Rica, and it was actually a meeting about the Buddhist approach to peace that was organized by the University of Peace there, which is a UN university. And they thought, hey, we have the Dalai Lama coming as a speaker. We're going to invite all these spiritual NGOs to do this conference with us. They had an outcome document, as most UN meetings do, and it was called the Declaration on Human Responsibility for Peace and Sustainable Development. And they said the Costa Rican government, and actually your viewers can actually view the very first part of the conference on UPeace's YouTube channel. And you'll hear him talking there that the Costa Rica government had a plan that later that year, in October of 1989, they were going to submit this outcome document to the United Nations General Assembly as Agenda Item 21. Now, it's significant because really, most people think of Agenda 21, like you said, as just an environmental plan. And even then it was significant, the fact that for the first time ever, humans were basically put on the same priority level as the earth, the biosphere, animals, insects, everything. And so we were just another resource to be managed along with the rest of them. And you see that today even with the UN's pandemic treaty and their One Health agenda for the WHO. But this contained a little second piece of it, right? Because like you said, they needed all the hearts and minds of America to buy into this worldview that we were all one. And therefore, it, along with Agenda 21's environmental plan to change land use regulations and resource management, was a plan to systematically change education, not just in America, but across the world, so that it would produce students with this very worldview that's very collective, and that values the rights of the collective community or the common good above their own individual rights.
Yeah, and to be clear, that there's really a very obvious connection to Eastern mysticism, to the pantheistic worldview, to the extent where these people were actively working on this, injecting it into education, and I want to get into the nitty-gritty between the two different branches of Buddhism there. But as they understood it, this couldn't just be like an individual effort to achieve nirvana. This had to be like all humanity, this collective evolution into this nirvana, this Buddhist end goal, I guess. Talk to us about that component of it, and I also want to get into how this fits in with the World Core curriculum, which you mentioned the University of Peace. That's where Robert Mueller comes from, the father of global education, the guy who wrote the World Core curriculum. Now, he was a fervent disciple of Alice Bailey, the founder of the Lucifer Publishing Company, later renamed the Lucis Trust. So how does all this weird Eastern spirituality, this occultism, this New Age stuff then merge with education?
Right. Well, it's kind of crazy, right? Because you think, we live in America, supposedly we're supposed to kind of keep, church and state separate, right? We shouldn't be having a state-sanctioned religion being taught in schools, but this is exactly what happened. And it's significant because, and your viewers can actually go, I have a longer article about how social emotional learning, which is another program I've covered, is based on this Mahayana Buddhism. And really that there was a plan to literally put this into all sectors of society through the Contemplative Mind and Life Society, which the Dalai Lama was also involved in. And the whole premise of it is that, most people think of Buddhism as a personal path to enlightenment or nirvana. You pray, you meditate, you deal with your suffering here on earth. And even then, many people in America don't ascribe to that worldview. They have a very Western or Christian individualist worldview. But in Mahayana Buddhism, it's a little different. It literally requires the participation of all. And your getting through all your suffering is actually a path for everyone to reach nirvana. So therefore, I think this is where, it kind of meets brass tacks, is this whole concept that you have to suffer, you have to give up something for the rest of collective humanity in order for everyone to reach this nirvana. And this is very un-American. It means that they can literally take away your individual rights. And Rosa Quare, who was a great researcher who spent most of her end of her life talking to people across the world about Agenda 21 and how it was manifesting itself in local agendas, she had this great visual demonstration. She had a cup of water and a cup of milk. And she said, the whole idea behind Agenda 21 is you have to balance your individual rights, this cup of water, with this cup of milk. And the water represented our constitutional republic, and the milk represented communist governments like communist Russia, Nazi Germany, China, things like that. So then she'd have a pitcher in the middle, and she'd pour those 2 cups of water in. And she said, see, it's balanced. What happens with the water? And she would say, got milk? Because really, and she was doing this with a host one time. And he's like, oh, it's water milk. She goes, no, actually, it's just milk. Because now your individual rights have been subsumed and subordinated by the collective. And so it's really important that this is what was being taught to kids, is that they didn't have any rights when it came to, the rights of all. And that was really significant and a problem, because then they were implanting this into Western schools, where we really much believe in individual rights and freedoms based on our Constitution and Bill of Rights. And nobody knew it. And here's the thing, this New Age thing with Robert Mueller, he said in his foreword to his World Core curriculum that it was based on the books of Alice Bailey, which were channeled by a Tibetan Buddhist that she would talk to or communicate with. He literally says that in the foreword of his manual. And the tie to this Agenda 21 conference that I found in 1989 was that one of the people who were involved with that group, who ended up putting this in education in America, her name was Dot Maber. She was actually a part of the Esoteric Science and Cultural Education Foundation. And so she talks about in there that this is, her whole speech is about Shambhala and all these different things. So there is very much an occultist underpinning to all of this agenda to put Eastern religion into education in the West.
Yep. And I have read a lot of these Alice Bailey books. In fact, I have a lot of them, including her book, Education in the New Age. And it is very open about the desire for what she calls a world federation, also known as a world government, a world brain. Universal consciousness is something she's obsessed with, where the individual consciousness merges into this universal consciousness. And of course, she was channeling all this from ascended masters that she claimed to be talking to. But she talked about using the methods of John Dewey in this process. She talked about moving us toward a new race, right? We're going to evolve into this new race that was supposedly superior. She talked about the great heresy of separateness holding this all back, and that eventually we were all going to end up with this universal consciousness. And you can't understand what's going on here without understanding the role of education in this. So I want to bring it back to the American people, because I think a lot of this is just like, well, who cares what the clown car at the UN does? What you document in your recent article, Lisa, is that our government very deliberately and very strategically injected this kind of stuff into our schools through the federal government, starting with Bush. And I also want to talk about some of these follow-up UN agreements, like the Jomtien Declaration, what they came up with in Dakar, where they decided that education would be a common and universal responsibility rather than a parent or local government decision. But let's start with how they got this stuff into the United States. I learned from your article that Barbara Bush was a part of this. How did they translate this crazy UN stuff into a classroom in America?
Well, it all started with a kind of protege of Robert Mueller called Philip Snow Gang. He was a Montessori teacher here in Atlanta, Georgia. And not only was he a participant and a major player at that June 1989 conference where they came up with this Declaration on Human Responsibilities, but also he was attending meetings before then. There was one with Ted Turner and Robert Mueller as well that he had attended, and it's actually documented in the Holistic Education Review how he left that conference and he said, I want to, Robert Mueller gave them a mandate to go out and do something about what he was talking about as far as creating this global citizen education model. And so he came up with this Education 2000 conference in 1990 in Chicago. They invited 80 holistic educators from across the United States and the world. They had quite a few world players there as well. They invited the organizer of the Seeking the True Meaning of Peace conference to be their keynote speaker, and based their Education 2000 document that came out of that conference on the declaration that they came up with earlier. So from that, this Education 2000, they were working with UNESCO and it says in the Education 2000 paper that they were working with UNESCO to make these Education for All conferences or world conferences. They had one in 1990 in Jomtien, Thailand, in which you just talked about. President Bush was there. And then immediately after, they came back, and President Bush, along with the National Governors Association and a bunch of other people, formed the U.S. Coalition on Education for All. And their main idea in that paper was to implement the ideas from the World Conference. And so they brought together all the ed tech people and all the whole child education people and tried to come up with this plan for holistic education in America. Well, that plan didn't pass during Bush's presidency. There was a lot of pushback in Congress. So Bill Clinton reimagined America 2000 as Goals 2000 and got it over the finish line when he was president. And that's really what we're seeing in our education today. And you can see the fruits of that. You have to wonder why on college campuses we have students being okay with things like carbon credits, being okay with things like forced vaccination or forced masking. They really have for decades now, since the 90s, been implemented into this pantheistic worldview where they believe their individual rights don't matter when it comes to the needs of the collective.
Yep. And then you add into that the One Health approach that the World Health Organization just enshrined in its crazy new pandemic treaty, where they actually put human collective on par with cockroach collective and plants and the climate and all that. And this is a recipe for catastrophe. Very, very clearly. I want to save some time at the end, Lisa, to make sure that we share with the folks some ideas on what they can do about this. There's so many other things to go through here with you that I want to talk about, but what are the implications of this? Like, if this isn't stopped, if they're able to brainwash all the children in the world with this kind of weird spiritual, political, economic agenda, what does the world look like in 20 years, 50 years, 100 years?
Not good, Alex. I think we already see, again, the radicalism of what's happening with our kids. First of all, I just want to point out that this harms children. When you have children who grow up in a household and they are inculcated with a certain set of values, and they go to school and those values are fundamentally challenged and turned on their head, and they're taught a completely different set of values, they actually have to disassociate themselves. So they have to be one person to belong at school and to fit in with the value system there, and then they have to be another person at home. And they have to be told in order to do that the parents lie to them, right? That it really should be more about others and not that we shouldn't teach kids to care about the earth or care about other people, but to completely subsume their rights to the collective, that's not something that most children in the West are taught at home. And really it should be up to the parents to give them a worldview. And this is the problem, is we have now education teaching a worldview. And it's going to create a bunch, we see the activists happen, right? The people in the streets advocating for things like Black Lives Matter, which is a Marxist organization. You have
by the admission of the founders, by the way, right? That's not just right. a slur. They are proud Marxist trained organizers. They said on TV. So
yes, she definitely went on video, and you can find it online. And I think that we're creating kids who are going to grow up into be adults who have positions of power that are going to just try to destroy the systems and institutions of America that make it great. They make it so that, we're not set up according to equity, right? Where we use the color of someone's skin to allocate resources or to do anything, but really that it's about merit and working hard to make sure that everyone has what they need. And so I think that really what it's going to be is the destruction of America if this continues. And I think really what we should start doing is sue the pants off these people, to be honest. I mean, they really are, this is a state-sanctioned religion. I've had documents that basically state that, and they need to stop, because education should be about academics, not about figuring out what the attitudes and values and beliefs of kids are and tracking them over time.
And yeah, that's exactly what all these UN agreements call for. They say, we must have changes in attitudes, values, and beliefs. It's interesting that we're having this conversation today, Lisa. There was just this month, big award, $2.6 million in damages for victims of government schools in Chicago who were subjected to forced transcendental meditation. Comes out of the Hindu religion, another related Eastern spiritual discipline, and they settled before losing in court. But very, very clearly here, it's inappropriate for governments to be trying to brainwash these kids with pagan religious traditions, Eastern religious traditions, and yet this stuff is still moving ahead, right? Bill Gates, of course, collaborated with UNESCO on globalizing education. They signed a concrete deal in 2004. Then we got Common Core. So all of this, folks, when you trace back the funding, the people, it's all leading us very clearly in this extremely nefarious direction. Lisa, in the last 5 minutes or so that we have left, what do we do about this? I mean, there's a lot of people listening, watching, just ready to throw their arms up in despair. I don't know what to do. This is terrible. They're brainwashing our kids. Yes, they are. What do we do about this?
I keep telling people that first and foremost, not everybody homeschools their kids. Some people send their kids to regular public school. I feel like it should be a parent's choice. Obviously, you say all the time they kind of playing Russian roulette with that. But if you do, I think it's very important to, since you're make sure you are very close to your kids. It's those kinds of deep relationships that can be fostered at home that really kind of shields kids from adopting these different kinds of worldviews. That it's not enticing to them. They really much care about their parents and care about kind of their tribe and their family. So I think first of all, make sure that's really solid at home. Have dinner with your kids every night. Talk to them about what they're learning at school. Help them to navigate, because it's when you have those close relationships and these conversations come up very naturally that you can kind of troubleshoot, their questions like, hey, I really feel like I want to be empathetic towards the environment. What they saying is true about, the whole world's going to basically, freeze in 10 years or become burning hot in 10 years. They keep changing, global change, instead of global cooling and warming, they had to change it, right? Because nothing came true, right? So I think that for you to be able to navigate that with your kids and have those conversations, and you kind of say, it doesn't make sense, right? Here they're calling for America to curb their resource consumption, but China can go do whatever they want. So you point out those inconsistencies and those things that bring them back to the real truth of the matter. And like I said, I think we need to start going to school board meetings, speaking out, pointing out how it's a religion. There's plenty of material out there. And I think understanding too as a parent how this agenda works, because it doesn't always say like, hey, we're teaching our kids Agenda 21 or we're teaching our kids critical race theory. You have to get educated on how this manifests, right? When your kid goes to school and does social emotional learning, how do they brainwash the kid? Oh, they get them to reveal sensitive things about themselves to the rest of the group. And then they start saying, well, don't you want to be empathetic? Don't you want to show your compassion or empathy in action to your classmate who's, an underprivileged member of society, or maybe LGBTQIA? This is how they manipulate kids into these kinds of things. And so as a parent, you got to understand that, or even just as a citizen, right? This is how they're basically tricking the whole entire culture, and they're using empathy to do it. They also like to take words like resilience or anything else, or peace. Right now UNESCO has this big peace education movement, and then a bunch of stuff's going to fall underneath that. So peace education means that, hey, we're going to have to teach our kids comprehensive sexuality education, and we're going to have to teach them about climate literacy and digital literacy, and you have to curb what you say online and curb your First Amendment rights so that the whole needs of the collective can be taken care of. So I think understanding the agenda, being able to translate that into real words, into real life, and communicate that to others is a big solution to this problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree entirely, Lisa. And while I always do tell parents to get their children out of the government schools, the reality is we still pay taxes for these institutions. We have a right to expect that our taxes are not going to be spent brainwashing people to follow a false religion with origins in the East or the West or anywhere else, especially if it's being promoted by the United Nations. It's so outrageous and so totally unacceptable. And yet, it's happening across the United States, across the world, and it is getting worse. Lisa, how do people follow you and your work? I know you have a great Substack. You've got a YouTube channel. You get your articles published all over the place, The Federalist. The recent one was in InfoWars. I encourage people to go read that. What's the best way for people to follow your work?
I think exactly what you said. My YouTube channel, Parents and Patriots. I'm on X at I am Lisa Logan. My Substack, Education Manifesto, and that's pretty much it.
Excellent, Lisa. And final thoughts before we let you go.
I just think we need to get the U.S. out of the UN, and call your congressman and tell them that.
Yeah. And there's a bill right now in both houses, the Defund Act, disengaging entirely from the United Nations Debacle Act in the Senate. Thank you, Senator Mike Lee. In the House, thank you, Congressman Chip Roy. There has never been, at least in my lifetime, a better opportunity to do this with Trump in the White House, Congress rapidly turning against the UN. And folks, whether the UN continues to exist or not, they have absolutely no business in our children's classrooms. They have absolutely no business teaching our children silly spiritual stuff that has no business in a public school classroom in America. Folks, we're almost out of time today here on Behind the Deep State, but I do want to thank you for tuning in, and I do want to encourage you to take this seriously. This isn't some abstract problem that we can afford to ignore. This isn't something that affects other people but not you. Even if you don't have kids in the schools, maybe you have grandkids, maybe you have nephews, nieces, neighbors, even if you don't have any kids in your life. These are the future voters. These are the future political leaders. These are the future CEOs who are going to be making decisions that directly impact your life. And if we want to preserve freedom in this country, if we want to preserve the traditional values that underpinned the establishment of this country, we're going to have to not just expose this, but also oppose it. So now that you've learned some about this, go read Lisa's article. You'll find it at Infowars.com. Also go to thenewamerican.com. We've got lots of good information there on all these things, going clear back to the 1990s. And I want to thank you again for tuning in, whether you're watching us on TV or radio or podcasts or any other place. Thank you so much. I'm Alex Newman for the New American Magazine. God bless you all.
Have you heard the latest from the United Nations? They're telling us to eat bugs. They say that it's going to help save the planet. They're even developing a list of bugs for us to eat and regulating how they're going to bring them to us. I don't know about you, but I am not eating bugs. To learn more about what the United Nations has planned for you, visit thenewamerican.com to subscribe and get 25% off the cover price.